Hi guys, on this episode, I had the pleasure of interviewing Frédérique Pedretti, VP of International Quality at BD. She has a career that spans more than 2 decades in healthcare, covering big pharma and medical devices, as well as diagnostics. She's worked in quality, operations, R&D, and global project management, and worked in Europe and in the US. On this episode, we spoke about executive presence, what it is. Spoiler alert, it's a skill that you can develop. Storytelling, and finally, why a career path is more like a piece of spaghetti than a straight line. Enjoy! Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Career Diaries by Elemed, the podcast dedicated to talking about careers in the medtech industry. And today, I'm super excited to have with me the one and only Frédérique Pedretti-Abel. Frédérique, welcome to the show.
Hey, hi, Helena. Thanks for having me today. Great to speak. Great to share some of my experience.
Yeah, and I'm super excited about this topic because this is a really practical topic. Today, we're going to be talking about executive presence. But before we go into that, Frédérique, tell me a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Yes. So, my name is Frédérique Pedretti. I am currently working at BD as the Vice President of Quality International. I'm with BD since 3 years, really enjoying the journey there. A little bit more about myself. I am an executive with 25 years of experience in the medtech and pharma industry. And I would describe myself as a strategic and results-driven transformation leader with broad-based global healthcare experience. So throughout my career, I have worked both as a pharmacy practitioner, but as well as an executive in the healthcare industry in different companies. And I have lived in different places in Europe and in the US. So I started my career in R&D. And from there, I moved to different places, really had the opportunity to go to ops, to global project management, as well build really my expertise in quality end-to-end from design assurance to quality operation and regulatory compliance. That's for me.
And I have to say, so we've literally just launched our gender distribution report, and I have to say you are in a minority as a female executive working in quality at VP level, and so I know, having followed your story over the years, that executive presence is really critical to help you get to that top VP level role. So I'd love to just dive in. So for you, Frédérique, what is executive presence? What does it mean?
So for me, very simple, right? I would say it's really the ability to inspire confidence, to act decisively. And it's really a skill. So that's the good news, because it's something that can be built up, right? And to a certain extent, it is what it takes to get a position of authority or to get to the next big move. So I think most of the important decisions on career, right, are taken when people, of course, are not in the room. So all these decisions are impacted by confidence, or whether you have been able to instill that confidence or trust in the people or managers that are going to be the decision maker, right? So, and I think, if you look at studies, executive presence constitute 25% of what it takes to get a position of authority, or what it takes to get to the next big move. So that's what I would say. But as well, right, I don't want to be a little bit too conceptual, but I also think there is really 3 important things, right, in order to be good within, at executive presence. It's about gravitas, right? It's about communication. And number 3 is about appearance. So the gravitas is really how you show up and how you act and signal to others that you have credibility. How do you interact with others? Are you composed in difficult situations? Are you able to stay calm? But it can also be about being assertive or using force. And sometimes that can be seen as, in particular for women, to be perceived as bossy or dominant. The other important piece is communication, right? It's very important to deliver a concise and compelling message, right? Meaning you need to have great presentation skills, right? You need to know your audience. And maybe we can elaborate a little bit more on that. And number 3 is appearance. It doesn't really mean that you must dress up, but you need to put some effort on how you present yourself, right? And there the body language is part of that as well. And I would say the energy is going to change if you smile and if you are calm.
Yeah. So I think it's something you mentioned really early on. You said it's a skill, which is good news. And that's really interesting for me, because I speak to people who perhaps think that it's just how somebody might be, right? It's just their personality. And then there's this feeling with a lot of people, you can't really change your personality or who you are. But actually talking about executive presence as a skill, that's implying that that's something that can be learned and developed and strengthened over time.
Yeah. I completely agree with that. Yeah. So what do you want to know?
No, so I would like to know then, for you, when did you realize that actually executive presence is a skill? And then when did you take the conscious decision to develop that skill?
Yeah. Look, I started, I have a Ph.D. So I started to work in a lab, right? And in a lab, you do your studies, you do your work, you have to document. At the time, it was still in like all on paper. But there, I wasn't really able to, to realize that this is important. I think the time I started to have to present on some of the projects, product in development when I was in R&D, and when you have to go to present to executives, right? I started to be coached because I was more of a timid person, right? To be able to deliver, right, a high level message. Probably at the time I didn't see that as important, but probably the time when I was going for a bigger job with more responsibility and where I didn't get the job. And my mentor at the time, we had kind of a debriefing session, and he was trying to explain to me that it's not all about, delivering, results and overperforming. It's much more than that, right? So that's the time I started really, when I didn't get the job and I will explain why I didn't get the job, that I started to realize that this is very important.
So it's always from the opportunities we don't get, and mistakes, right? Sometimes those are always the biggest learnings, because the pain you learn through pain, right? But so what did they communicate to you as the reason why you didn't get the job? Did they directly say your executive presence wasn't there, or?
No, I think sometimes it's a little bit tough to get really direct feedback, but it was more like, of course you are not ready, and you probably you have to be able, because it's not only about showing up in a bigger presentation, it's as well the way you are perceived when you go to meetings, right? Are you engaged? Are you able to make your point, right? And probably at the time I was maybe a little more of an introvert, and I just talk when I really was 100% sure, right? So I think it was kind of it was communicated to me like, you are not ready yet. But I did realize that was a big part of it.
And so then what did you do in order to start building that and learning about how you can improve?
What I did, and what I encourage everybody to do, is I really, I was involved in the formal mentoring, but I was thinking about really who could help me, improving that. And I decided to go, and I know we don't want to go into that topic, but I started to go into informal mentoring, really looking at the people that were good at this skill, right? And trying to seek for some support and going for that and getting their feedback and getting their help. At the time, and that was much later in my career, when I moved to the US, my boss at the time said to me as well, I'd like all of my leadership team to go through an executive presence training. So we had the opportunity to do that. And that's not that easy, because, you're a little bit pushed outside of, let's say, your comfort zone, having to present, being recorded, right? Watching together the record with the coach and getting to the point about, hey, maybe these are the things you need to improve, like the tone of your voice, the way you sit, the way you stand, what you do with your hands, right? All of that. Yeah. So I think it's really a key thing, executive presence, to go to the next level. And the higher you go in an organization, right, the more important it is. And I think there are people that it's a little bit more natural, but I can also tell you, I had a boss that was very much of an introvert, and he was great on stage.
Yeah, yeah. And I think, you know, you have to lean into, you have to find your own way, right? Everybody's different. And you can be an introvert and still have great executive presence.
Exactly.
And you don't need to be the star of the show, but I know some very, very cool executives that don't really say much when they're in the room, but you know that they're there, you know, like and when they do speak up, the contributions that they make, the questions that they ask, they're memorable, right? And that all feeds into this executive presence topic. You mentioned a few things that you learned from doing this training. I'd love to dive in and actually get some practical advice then. So you spoke about tone of voice, you spoke about hand gestures, body language, how you actually show up. So what can you share as far as practical tips around these different points?
So I would say it's really much about, you know, if you talk about the speech, I think it's important that you have a well-paced speech, that you have a nice tone. And I think these are things that you can practice. And I would really recommend that you record yourself, right? The other thing is about, you know, how you stand, right? Like really, you know, stand straight, right? Breathe. I think these are things that are important. You know, if you are in a bigger room with an audience, I would say try to understand who your audience is, right? Because that's going to help you as well convey the right message. And I would say the eye contact, right, with maybe, and you can select, right, maybe in the assistant, you have people that you trust, right? That you can make sure that you have this kind of eye contact with the folks. I think this is going to be as well more engaging, right?
Mm-hmm. So when it comes to tone, that's a really interesting one, because you said, you know, record yourself and listen to your tone, the cadence of like actually how fast or slow you speak. I know that there's data that implies or that was talking about, I read a report that sort of said people that speak really, really fast, even if they're super smart, it actually works against you as far as building your executive presence. And actually speaking slower makes people feel that you have more gravitas and that you're smarter. Yeah. And I thought that was really interesting. I'm naturally one of these people, as you can tell, that speaks at 100 words an hour. So that's something that I consciously try to work on. But what about tone? What can you tell me about tone? How does that actually make a difference?
I think it gives some confidence, right? The fact that, you know, probably, and this is why it's important in your mind as well to have a story, right? Mm-hmm. What are the headlines, right? What's the topic going to be about? What are one or two key facts that you want to tell them? And maybe as well, what's the story? Tell them some anecdotes, right? And because otherwise there is always the tendency, maybe in particular when you are younger, maybe to learn your speech, right? And then, or to read it, you know, with a kind of prompter, and you don't feel natural at all. But it's kind of like, you know, like singing a little bit, having different type of intonation, right? I would say that. And look, for me, probably right now, I think I have a much better level of English. But when I started, I can tell you, and you can still hear my French accent, right? Probably I was less confident. Yeah. And some of the coach I had is like, you need to be able to use that as a strength, because it could also be really charming, right? So,
yeah. And I was speaking to somebody the other day who literally said, you know, it's all about perspective, because yes, okay, you know, she had an Italian accent, and she was like, you know, at the beginning, I was always apologizing for my accent, right? Saying, I'm really sorry, I've got a strong accent, and you know, my English is okay, but sorry for my Italian accent. And then she said that she went on a coaching course, and framing is really important. So now she starts with something along the lines of, it's my third language. English is my third language, you know, so no apologies. And actually, by the way, I speak 3 languages. So it's actually a complete, and by the way, I'm doing this in not my native language. And that, just the framing of how you set up conversations as well, and how you show up to your point, that becomes really, really important. What about pitch? So when you said tone, you meant the tone of the conversation. I'm wondering, does pitch make a difference? How high or low your voice is, and do you try to pitch your voice at a lower tone, you know, a lower pitch?
Look, I think that's a good point. Maybe that's something, you know, I'm just trying to, as much as I can, to stay like natural, you know, like authentic. I think you have to be careful, maybe not to overdo that, right? Otherwise, it looks a little bit too much. I mean, that would be my my view on this. Right. But think about it a little bit like a son. In particular, sometimes you have to do speeches, right? Like big town hall, and sometimes, you know, it's always good to have kind of a script. But I think it's important to be able to have like to change, right, a little bit the tone of your voice. Otherwise, it doesn't look very authentic, right? And some leaders are better than others on that.
So we've spoken about quite a lot of practical things, but then what's running through my mind is, okay, so let's imagine that you're delivering an important message, or you're in a really important meeting, you know, it's heated, but how are you actually remembering to stand up straight, breathe, make eye contact, and do all of these things, as well as deliver a really powerful message?
You know, when I have to go to important meetings and deliver, like in particular, I would say bigger presentation, or like you do a town hall with your organization, right? And probably there is 2 pieces of it. Maybe in the past, before COVID, it was more like face-to-face meeting, maybe not with everybody, but you tend to be more in a room with an audience sitting there. What I would do in any case, right, is I would practice. I would record myself, or I would rehearse in front of people that I trust, right, in order to get feedback. And then, so that means that I have some good, let's say, I'm already very comfortable with the content. And then I think it's easier to think about all of the rest. Now, if it's physical, like a face-to-face meeting, of course, we can talk about, you know, your appearance, how you stand and all that. The fact is that after COVID, a lot of the meetings, town halls, etc., are virtual, right? So it's a little bit more difficult. So I think probably the speed and the tone of your voice is even more important. Or maybe wearing bright colors, right? Like I try to do today, I think is important as well. And I think you have to keep these 2 things. But anyway, whether it's a face-to-face meeting or virtual, to me, the important thing is to practice. Don't read. Have your kind of your storytelling in mind, right? What's the headlines? What are your 2 or 3 keyword facts, and what's the conclusion, right? What's the message that you want to pass, right? I think that's important.
And I think it's really interesting because knowing you and seeing you around, you know, this very senior, very well composed executive, it's actually fascinating to know that actually you do actually practice, and that's actually a skill that you've developed over time, and actually it can be learned and developed. I want to talk about virtual executive presence, just because you spoke about how often now the interactions are not always in person. So some of these things that you spoke about, like for example, eye contact, right? And body language. What tips do you have for executive presence when actually you've got a camera in front of you and not a person? How do you build eye contact there and create that connection? And if the only bit that's in the frame is, you know, from like your today, right, like just below your shoulders up, what do you do with your hands? Do you move them? Do you not? How do you add to executive presence then?
Yeah, I try probably being more of a, like, you know, Latin person. Yeah, I try sometimes to use my hands, right? Like today I explained that executive presence, there are key 3 important topics, right? I don't know if you notice, I try to use my hand, 1, 2, and 3, right? These are kind of tips. Then, yeah, I think the eye contact piece is a difficult one when you are like, if this is a virtual meeting. Now, what I do very often is I'm not the only one presenting. I have some of my team that are there as well. So there's a way to set this up, right? So I mean, at least I could see them 2 or 3, and I could try to look at them, right? But otherwise, it's really looking at the camera and maybe thinking more about, hey, don't forget, right? You have people that are on the other side, right? So, but I think it's probably virtual. I feel it's sometimes more difficult. And I think for me, the practice is important, you know, just maybe 1 hour before, like practicing what I'm going to say, right? Just remembering the key things and doing it, you know, maybe recording myself. And I think I feel more confident going in. Yeah. I know that sometimes, you know, you don't have, but it's really much depending on, you know, the type of meeting. I wouldn't do it for everything, but if it's important, yes. I feel more confident doing the practicing before. Did you do it today before this session? Yeah, I did. You know, I was traveling a lot like the past couple of days. So I was going through a long flight yesterday. So I had the opportunity to review my notes, and I did a little bit this morning. Yes. Well, it's paying off. It's paying off, I have to say. You mentioned something early on around how sometimes, in particular for women, that confidence or that executive presence can come across as bossy, or I've also seen sometimes the word aggressive used, more for women, I would say. So for your story, have you actually ever experienced gender stereotypes, and then sort of like, what were they? How did you get around it? Yeah, look, maybe more particular to this topic, right? I have been told once by a trusty colleague, right, that, you know, we took time to establish trust, but, you know, it's like, hey, end of the year, can you give me a bit some feedback? You saw me presenting, we worked together at this project. Can you give me some really like honest feedback, right? And I got that. And it was around, you know, sometimes you are so passionate and you are so like, seem confident. You know, I work in quality a long time, that you feel a little bit, some people on the other side might feel a little bit, they might not be willing always to, you know, to not to ask questions, but you might be seen a little bit overly confident, and that might lead that maybe on the other side, you know, people might come up with less questions or like wouldn't challenge you. You know, I got this type of feedback. And look, this was a trusty colleague. So yeah, I'm trying to you know, I was thinking a lot about that, and trying to maybe sometimes, you know, be a little, not less confident, but give the space to others as well to come up with their arguments, right? I don't know if that makes sense, but I got this type of feedback. And then the other one is as well, of course, I got like, you know, being bold and strategic, you know, and then being too assertive. And I got a prize in a previous company that was about being bold and strategic. And I think I was very proud of getting that. But it's true that there is a tendency sometimes, you know, without being like too much a pro-feminist, that women, you know, we are good at what we do, and if we are very confident, that we are being told that we are like, you know, bossy or too direct. But if you look and if you read the book of Sheryl Sandberg, this is a leadership skill, right? So we shouldn't be as well finding too much excuses. I think being authentic is the most important.
Yeah, and leaning in to your point about the book. Okay, so if we talk about what you see around you, or let's say the next generation of up and coming executives, what mistakes do you see them make often when it comes to stuff like executive presence and building their brand?
You know, sometimes I see people that are too arrogant or speaking too much. So not making the point, right? Not giving a good story, because I think it's as well, right? Executive presence is very close, or is very linked with, you know, storytelling.
Okay.
Right? And I see people that are maybe overly confident. I have been seeing people on stage, right, that are so confident that at the end they don't pass the message, right? And then you can see, and recently I was at a meeting with a good speaker, but I think very much after 10 minutes, he lost his audience, because I think he was too convinced, too arrogant, not making the point, not doing good storytelling, right? So these are the things that I would see. Now, there might also be people on the other side that are too timid, that are lacking confidence, that are speaking like, you know, not very loud, you know, that sometimes are great people, right? But it's a skill that they need to learn, and that they need to be more confident with.
Yeah. You speak about storytelling quite a lot, and that's also another skill, and it could probably be another podcast episode. But what makes a good story?
For me, it's like first introducing, having the right headlines, right? Introducing your topics. And then I think it's about explaining what you are talking about, but providing great examples, anecdotes, right? To make it more lively. And maybe as well, having sometimes like little fun story to break the ice, right? I think that's important as well. And then it's like, what do you want the people to remember, right? I think it's coming with 1 or 2, 3 things, like keywords. I think that these are all things that make a good story in my sense.
So so therefore it's important to design the story.
Yes, very much.
Interesting. Okay. So do you have any additional, I know we spoke about these three concepts at the beginning, but do you have any very specific do's and don'ts that you can share with our audience?
Yeah, I think I'm thinking about, you know, within the do's, it's more about think about how you might want to be seen by others, right? Try to visualize that. And probably that comes more like to the part that is like the tone and how you stand, etc., right? I think I would also say, and I know we touch on other things here, is like build your personal brand. I think that's linked as well on how you want to be seen by others. Maybe work as well on your self-promotion. Don't forget that piece. And probably that's a piece of advice that is important for, let's say, people that start their career, like, right, people just coming from college. Regarding the speech, I think we talked a little bit about having a well-paced speech, a nice tone. I think this is something that you can practice. And think about as well how you are expressing yourself in meetings. It doesn't have to be big presentation, right? I would really use that as a kind of test and practice, right? Try to lean in, right? Even if you are like, when you go to a meeting, I think it's important that you are not just there, like sitting there, but making your point. And as well, having a presence, like smiling, you know, and being really physically there. So that's really what I see with the do's, I would say. And of course, I would say, in order to, we talked a lot about practicing, make sure that, you know, you are involved in projects, you know, here at my company, and I know at many of the healthcare, we have an employee resource group where like young professional can have a role, right? I would say it's more of a very, good environment where you can practice, right? Have a role there.
Mm-hmm.
And then, make sure that you get feedback from, if you have a mentor, if you have a trusty colleagues, get feedback from your peers, people that are advocating for you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So that would really be the do's, right?
Mm-hmm.
That I would see. I don't know, on the don'ts, I think the opposite, right? If I can continue with that, I would say don't be timid, don't be too quiet, not talking at all, right? Otherwise, you might be seen as somebody that is lacking confidence.
Mm.
On the other side, talking too much, not going to the point. I mentioned that today. I don't think it's the right thing to do either.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think we didn't talk too much about that. It's like control your emotions, right? The emotional intelligence piece in that is important as well, right? That, you are seen as a well-composed person, if I might say this way.
Mm-hmm.
These are all the things that, do's and don'ts that I think are very important.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Who inspires you?
You want a name or?
Yeah, or has there been someone that as you've come up through your career, you spoke to the concept of mentors, for example, earlier on. I'm just curious to know if there was someone that you said, hey, that I want to be like that person, or that's someone I really respect, or if it's lots of different people that you take different pieces from, for example.
Yeah, I would say it's not just, of course, there are people in the world that I really respect and that are like really role models, but I would say in my professional life, it's a mix of different people that I worked with,
Mm-hmm.
or different people that, have been working with as mentor, as coach as well, that I used, right?
Yeah.
I've seen people, as said, right, a previous executive that I worked very closely with, very like introverted guy, but great on stage, passing the right message, very compelling story, great in storytelling. But I would say there is not just one person, there is several, and there are people that are better than others, right? And sometimes you feel, when you see people that are not as good, you feel maybe it's a shame, because when I see that person doing all of the great work behind, right? It's maybe a pity that, and I would say, it's not a question of nationality, but I have been like working in the US for 2 years, and I think I got more there in terms of getting coach, because it's so important, right?
Yeah.
And that I learned so much. And I had a great coach that was working with different executives in the healthcare, and she was supporting me a lot.
If you reflect back on your journey to where you are today, what advice would you give to a younger you?
I would say I think it's important to have a goal in the professional career, but as well personal, where you want to go. Mm-hmm. And then, success and career is not just a straight line, right? It's like a spaghetti, I would say.
I love that.
And so it's like, make sure that you get out of your comfort zone. Make sure that you get exposed to different roles, take risk. Yeah. And learn. I think learning and being curious are the most important thing.
Yeah. Well, look, it's been an absolute pleasure to learn. I've definitely taken a lot away. I'm sure our listeners have as well. But I have one final question for you, Frédérique, which is the question that I love to ask everybody at the end of the show, which is, what is the legacy that you want to leave on the world?
Look, there's different things. I learned, I would say I love what I do. I worked in healthcare a very long time. I worked in quality a long time. I'm very passionate. And sometimes, it's like, I like working across the different functions. I see quality really as a as a kind of management tool as well.
Mm-hmm.
But I think most important is to be a role model for my daughter, a 21-year-old that studies in business schools right now. That's one. And the other is during my career, I have been acting as I've been a mentee, but I've also been acting as a mentor. I have been mentoring females, but also males, probably younger professionals. And I've been very passionate doing that through HBA, very passionate about that. It has been a great learning platform for me, of course, learning a lot, but also giving back. And I'd like to continue that. So really making a difference there and supporting young professionals in their career.
Wow, very inspiring. I have to say, I'm walking away very inspired with lots of tips as well on how to build my own executive presence. So thank you so much, Frédérique, for coming on the show. And to everybody else listening, stay tuned. We'll see you in a few weeks' time for another episode of Career Diaries by Elemed. Thank you so much, Frédérique.
Thank you, Elena, for having me. It was a pleasure. Thank you.